Friends, what a special day for you to be with us. We are so excited to have this conversation. Okay, basically, what we've done is ask you, our precious listeners, what do you want to talk about? And let you ask us anything and we answer your questions. I have brought the amazing Jay Wolf and the phenomenal Leah Case here.
Hello.
To help us go through these. How this is going to work is Leah is going to ask us the questions that you asked over on our Instagram at Hope Heals. We went through and asked you to tell us what we should talk about, and we're answering those today. Now, I will say we will be doing this again because it's just so rich. You'll hear really, really
Great
cool
questions.
discussion,
Yeah,
great questions. So follow us on Hope Heals on Instagram and let us do this more often.
Yep,
I
we
love this. Thank y'all so much.
Can't wait to get started.
I wish we could start this podcast with a real fun, spicy, laugh out loud conversation. I just recognized the population faithfully listening to this. No, they just want to go. They want to hear the meat, and there's room for fun and fluff, and I love that sometimes, but now is not the time. Now's the time to jump in. Everybody's got a limited window to listen, so
sure.
Let's
these are
go.
questions too from all of you, so these are things that are on your heart. These
Absolutely.
Are real
Nobody
stories,
asked, what is your favorite food? I would answer that, but no one asked. But I do love almond wedding cake is my favorite food. If anybody wanted to know, a delicious amaretto-y, almondy cake, especially at a wedding, for some reason, is just the most delicious. In case you were wondering.
We know they were. That. I think they were wondering.
Nobody asked, but
yeah. They went in a little different direction. That's okay.
Well, let's dive in. We have some great questions, and I think these really, like you said, just run the gamut from disability to loss, pain, sickness. Just really great question. So the first question we have is, how have you managed the expectation that full healing won't happen with hopeful family members?
Good question. We have a lot of hopeful family members. It's interesting. I don't know if 16 years in, those family members are still hoping for a miraculous healing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's the story of a lot of our friends with disabilities or camp community. There is sort of this tension between expectation for your loved ones, and you get, we understand that,
of course,
a deep way. Obviously, with our, with your kids, family members, people you love, your friends, you want their life to be okay. You want them to be well. So it's well intended. I do think the way to kind of maybe reframe that is to say, look, even if I were to fully recover in every single physical way, or, things were to go back exactly seemingly how they were before everything happened, I would still be a different person.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe what we need to hope for is, how do I live fully into a new life after the trauma I've been through? How do I lean into post-traumatic growth, for instance? So I think kind of that, I don't know, that reframe might be the best way to do it. Yeah. Like, even if, who knows, maybe I will fully recover. Maybe my, what the doctors told me about my diagnosis won't actually happen, and I'll defy the odds. That'd be amazing. But even if those things happen, I'm still going to have to pick up the pieces of having gone through this reversal and this pain and this trauma. And how can you help me be a part of that as a new, in this new part of my story?
Yeah. I don't put God in a box, and I could have a miraculous healing fully of the body tomorrow. Likely that's not coming on earth. And I think me being realistic in this story helps my family be realistic in this story.
To find acceptance for your story and the reality of your story does not mean you do it without hope. So I think you can still be hopeful while while finding a peace with your reality and not always wishing for what it was or being afraid or have so much expectation on what might be, which you can't really control. So I think bringing the family into that is like, I'm okay with my life. I need you to be okay
Yes. And I do think that part of that is being vulnerable enough with your family to show them, like, I'm living well into this accurate story. I'm accepting this story and radically accepting the story, and you should too. Like,
Right.
I think for me, the family members that have really resisted this story because it's hard and painful, that hasn't done good things to our relationships.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And we're not saying that God isn't good because there's not been full physical healing. God is still good and still doing a work. It just might look different than people want it to or hope it might. So
Yeah.
that's a good one, guys. All right. I think this one's more specifically for Catherine. How do you deal with the guilt of feeling like a burden on your family?
Yeah. So very thankfully, years ago, I began to recognize that if I'm here, I'm supposed to be here. That if I wasn't supposed to be here, I would have died. I should have died. I should have died. Was thrown around so much. And the reality is, if I should have died, I would have died. And I did not die, so I shouldn't have. And because of that, I felt a lot of freedom to recognize, if I'm supposed to be here and everything in my life is in this story, we're all people living together in a family, then I'm worthy of being taken care of by this family. And I made a lot of peace with, I'm worthy of care. And that's not easy to get to. It's taken a lot for a possibly codependent human with a lot of problems and a lot of people pleasing to be cared for life. And yet I know too much to know it's also not glorious. I mean, through Hope Hills Camp in particular, but through this entire community, including the GoodHard Story community of people largely in the disability space, I've seen the typical children, the typical spouse, the typical sibling are just a different level of person. That when you have up close experience with a loved one living with disability, you're different. Your character is different. Your compassion is very different. Your maturity. So I feel like that beautiful truth of James 1:4 is at work with my kids in this story. And maybe my husband, I am enabling them to be mature and complete, lacking nothing.
Well, we thank you for that. I think probably guilt of being a burden is less at this point, your struggle, but more like you wanting to help and participate and not fully being able to do that is what weighs you down more. I mean, again, I know your heart is to help and you want to be, engaged with your kids or, helping me cook dinner or whatever. And I think that, having to kind of just receive, hey, like we know you would if you could, but you shouldn't sort of live in that cycle again, outside of just accepting, hey, like I'm not fully able to do that. And that stinks. But also other people get to honor me with my own limitations and do this with me, hopefully, but also sometimes for me, and I don't know, there's a tension there. There's a loss there. It's not necessarily how you wanted it to be, but, you can kind of, at some point, I think, take that feeling like you're not adding enough to the moment, to the family.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think there is a degree of just, I don't know, some would call it resignation, but I would call it relief. And I mean, it's not giving up, but it's a recognition of the reality.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's a good thing.
Well, and you described yourself as codependent people pleasing. And it's so funny because I'm thinking strong, independent, capable woman
Aw.
would get frustrated to not be able to, how Jay said, you want to participate,
Mhm.
you want to contribute, and often you just physically can't in a situation. You can't pick up a heavy box and help
Mhm.
carry to the other room. And you, because of who you are, desperately want to be able to do that. And that's probably very frustrating sometimes.
Well, thank you for saying that. It is very frustrating. From the moments of trying to relearn to walk to today, there's been some significant frustration in being in a body that no longer fully works.
Right.
And
remembering what it was like to have that body that did fully work.
Mhm.
I'm sure.
It plays with your head, literally.
Right.
That, I can remember in brain rehab trying to stand up from being on my knees. Like they'd have me try to stand from being on my knees, stand
Mhm.
up. And a normal person, typically able-bodied human being can do that, like being on their knees and then stand. I can't do that and could not at all then. And I just couldn't get to where my brain understood that.
Right.
I'm telling my brain to do it and it doesn't do it.
Right.
And I can't. And that was really a wild realization. It doesn't work.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like it used to.
Yeah. Well, you're finding your way. Still.
Yeah. This does tee up our next question. Have your kids ever expressed frustration around your limitations as a parent? And how have you guys dealt with that? If your kids have felt frustrated that you couldn't fully engage or be involved in something?
Yeah.
I think the perception of that probably has weighed more heavily than, or the possibility of that has weighed more heavily than the reality.
Mhm.
For both of our kids, it's really, James was 6 months old when Catherine had her stroke. So there's obviously subconscious or just deep experiences for him of loss or grief or whatever. But for the most part, this is the only life he's ever known.
Right.
So he doesn't have much to compare it to. It's more our assumption that maybe he's lost something or he's frustrated, that probably causes more tension than how he really feels. And
Yeah.
I think there was even a unfortunate scenario years ago of a bullying situation, and a mom said, "Oh, I think James is being bullied because of your disability," which is so
What?
so out of
really
hand and really just kind of adding salt to the wounds.
But in her mind, she said it in the sing-songy voice.
Wanted you to know.
I know. I need you to know. I think I know why James is being bullied. It's because you're in a wheelchair.
Thanst.
I'm like, my worst nightmare
got enough mom guilt.
Yeah. Whoa. What?
Wow.
I think that over the years we have tried to figure out hey, this is kind of a theme, but accepting our reality as a family, but saying this is also maybe part of our superpower. I mean, we are interdependent as a family in ways that is really that are really beautiful. And I think the arc of that long-term kind of connection is going to serve our family so well. And we're not codependent. I would say interdependent. But even recently we've started doing family Olympics because, you're kind of you want to participate. You don't want your kids to feel okay, we can do this very limited number of things with our mom or together, or, dad's helping over here, so we can't do this thing we should be able to do. And so I think it was after the Paris Olympics and Paralympics, probably we started doing this, this family Olympics, which probably looks really sad.
No, it was after we watched
in the yard,
we watched the archer.
With his feet.
Limbs.
Yeah, that's true. You're gosh, if he can get up there and do it.
I can do this.
Epic moment.
Yeah,
the Olympics.
So I think, you honor and acknowledge the frustration. You honor, acknowledge too, that half the time that might be you're projecting your own frustration onto your kids and what they're thinking, and maybe they're not even thinking it. And then you get creative. And so for us, what's been sweet is we will go in the yard. Catherine will have her little walker and we'll, throw a football in a circle or a frisbee, and that's our first course. And sometimes, I'm very concerned I'm going to hit Catherine in the face with a frisbee, and it's going to be really not a great way to end the night. But then we go into basketball and shoot, and what's so cool is everybody, the anticipation is so high. And when mom makes a basket, I mean, you would have thought it was just game-winning touchdown. It's so beautiful. Again, just to as a family, celebrate from the baseline of our unique family and our story, not what we think should be or what could have been, but like what is. And it's so beautiful. But I mean, there are tensions, longings, frustrations there that we need to acknowledge before we can then jump into celebration of the reality.
And I think every single parent listening can relate to projecting our own issues on our children.
Yeah.
So making issues out of non-issues. So that's really good. And I would love to have, Case versus Wolf Olympic championship maybe someday.
Really sure. Okay.
Okay. Awesome. When your kids were little, how did you talk about how you became disabled and why you use a wheelchair?
I think both of our kids have really grown up knowing the stories of exactly what happened. See, what's crazy good and crazy weird, I'm not going to say bad, it's not bad, it's strange, is since I've talked about it, since we and now me have talked about it so much since you retired from speaking, it's me now. But so much, they've been in the audience many, many times and heard the story. We listened to the audiobooks of Hope Heals, Suffer Strong. They really, they will recount just funny parts of details of the story I'm not sure I knew they were tracking with. So they've grown up with it.
And on the converse, things you're like, surely you did know that, and they did not pick up on it or whatever.
Yeah, very true.
But I think, for most people who've gone through something really hard as an adult, trying to bring your kids into that, I think is the bigger question. What's appropriate? I mean, it certainly depends on the age more than anything, because they just aren't fully understanding even what you're talking about. Not like, okay, you're going to ruin them if they heard that, you had a hard thing happen. I mean, that's life. So I think that's appropriate to begin to tee up. I mean, we talk about this at the end of Suffer Strong, like praying over our kids, like even if tomorrow's a really, really hard day, God, we know you're going to show up. So I think just beginning to narrate that in really sometimes subtle ways, and sometimes really explicit ways, like, like this, I was totally healthy and this happened out of the blue, and it was really horrible and super scary and sad. And yet, we're here and we're figuring it out. But like we've not shielded our kids too often from the reality of the hard parts of our story, because I think, in a really deep way, it's their story too. So if we sort of downplay it or like don't fully let them in, then when they begin to pick up on those things and internalize them, and the hard parts as their story, they're like, well, my parents didn't even think this was an issue. Why do I think it's such an, it's kind of like you're setting them up, I think, to not fully be able to process their life and hopefully be resilient and find the redemptive arc in it. But we've really talked, pretty much since the start about what's happened. You used to say things like my brain exploded when they thought that was cool. And, first grade, they were like, wow. Like,
don't tell your friends that.
Exactly. They would Catherine would take the kids like a little sweet school at the end of our block on wheelchair rides. She would come to read a book or whatever and take them on wheelchair rides around the playground.
Yeah. There was like pony rides with better. It was really cute.
So again, it kind of flipped the script.
It became the cool thing. The classic story was, it's a little different now that James is driving, but when we would drive them to school in the morning, and obviously that means Jay driving, but I'm riding largely in the back seat because of my neck condition, so I'd have to turn around. I would narrate to them, do you see any other parents who have both parents? Do you see any other cars where both parents are taking their kids to and from school every day?
Yeah.
There would be about 0 both parents together doing that.
Right.
Oh my goodness, how cool is your life that you get both parents doing that to and from, and narrating almost like, and that's really cool.
Yeah.
And that's because of my disabilities. And I think that is probably where there is such a valuable lesson for all parents, is a lot of narration, of a lot of, hey, have you thought about it this way? Let's look at this differently. Let's reframe this and narrate it. So we're looking at what's actually going on here.
Right.
And I think there's a good GoodHard Story Podcast. So it's like to acknowledge there are hard things about it too.
Right.
It's like, and yet we're not going to be able to do this, or I'm going to need you to help this. And I think, eventually they receive the beautiful combination of a good and a hard life together. And that's the hope, to tee them up. That's the best thing we can teach them, I think, for the life ahead of them, is that it's going to be both, and there can be joy still. So
Yeah.
I think we've let our kids in on that from the start. And again, maybe their therapist will tell a different story.
Yeah,
I think sometimes people think, I want to shield my kids from pain, suffering, trauma. Well, then they get out to the real world and they see all the pain, suffering, and trauma, and they've never had it narrated to them or been invited into the story. And there's more pain from that, because they're like, why didn't my parents tell me that like things can hurt? So I think it's great to just, help narrate the story of what's happening, and recognizing with them that God is still in it and God is still good, even in immense pain and suffering. So
for sure.
I like the idea that this was about kind of like Christians in general, but like our goal is to narrate the world to the world. And obviously for parents, our goal is similar, to like narrate the world to our little world, which is our family and our kids. And like, that's, we just take it for granted sometimes that there needs to be this storyteller, like somebody who can see the bigger picture that then can tell that back. I mean, that's what humans have always done, is sort of taken on this bigger story, but somebody needs to be telling it. So that's what we get to do as parents. And it's a hard task a lot of times to tell a beautiful, true story well. But it's one that, we get to invite them into, and they hopefully want to keep living it really well.
And I think our kids and any kids are so looking for that. Yeah. They're looking how to make sense of this, what to do with that, or how to think through this thing. So we're providing some help.
Yeah.
Good. All right. This next one is a hard question. My husband and I were diagnosed with cancer 1 year apart. His oral cancer has resulted in a 100% liquid diet. I've overwhelmed by the thought that we will never enjoy dinner dates or family meals together in the same way. How do you deal with missing things you'll never get back?
Deep.
Good question.
Yeah, that's a great question.
That is a great question. Goodness. So hard. Golly, it's heartbreaking. I first of all want to acknowledge, having not eaten food for 11 months, I've had a taste, no pun intended, on how painful that is. I mean, I guess Jay's had a taste of how painful it is to have a spouse be on a liquid diet. And for many months, it wasn't even liquid. It was just no liquid at all, actually. Nothing for oral. But to think of that lifelong is very overwhelming. And I'm so sorry. I think you have to make new memories. And this is where the passage of time is a beautiful thing. I don't think nearly as much as I once did about all the things that used to be, because now it's been 16 years, and more about memories from 13 years ago and 15 years ago. So time is great in that new memories are made. And I think what one has to do is be about the reality, not all the things that were, but the things that are. The things that are in this story, and clinging to those and mourning the losses still. Absolutely.
There's such a grief around that.
There is.
That has to be acknowledged first, and that's going to take some time. We say, you can't go around it, but you got to go through that grief, and that's deep waters to have something so quintessential. Again, we talk about this a lot. Food isn't just about eating. It's about being a part of a story, about a part of a community, bearing witness to this act of really quintessential humanity of gathering around tables. And when you physically can't participate in that way, you literally and emotionally, spiritually feel this disconnection.
Absolutely.
To be like a bystander. And it's such a weird,
it's
horrible,
terribly isolating.
More horrible than you would think, of just an outsider. And that's also hard because people don't get why that would be maybe so painful until they have lived through it. It's kind of like, just
that wouldn't be
thought
good.
About it. But it's deeply painful. And again, Catherine lived through that and felt that. And in some ways, you still have a struggle to show up typically to, an environment, a party, a restaurant. Like it's not the same.
Right.
for
I would say
sure.
like there may be some, when the time is right, this might feel forced early on, but like when the time is right to go, sort of celebrate in your new way. And I don't know what that would look like going to a really special restaurant and having them bring your husband this incredible, fancy milkshake or something that he could drink, that just kind of, you're not pretending it's not real, but you're also saying, but even still, we're going to celebrate. We're going to find a way to like honor that you're still here. You guys are both cancer survivors. That's miraculous. So like, let's honor that. Let's celebrate that, but not, look past the reality that this stinks. Like this is really sad. And it's, this is a part of our life that we don't have moving forward, but what do we have that remains that we can find gratitude for and, fit into this new version of us.
Yeah.
So that's tough though. Gosh, that is really
Catherine, you talked before about when you were NPO and your friends, and you found out your friends and family were eating in another room because they don't want to make you feel bad. So my question, kind of offshoot of that, as a friend, family member, community support around somebody who might be going through something like this is, you can only give your perspective. Would you say it's more painful to not be invited to, because they're trying to shield you?
Right.
Would you want to be included knowing you couldn't participate? Or do you know what I'm saying? Is it better to not be invited? Should we continue to include? I think people think they're helping someone by just not inviting them or not including them.
Okay, so here's my thoughts. And this is just me, but I think I speak for a lot of folks in my camp, is the silence or the being left out is worse, but not so much with the food thing. So if someone's eating a delicious plate of food right in front of me, and I'm in PO for 9 months straight, that's horrific.
Right.
So yeah, eat in the other room.
Right.
However, tell me you are.
Right.
I was going to say the communication is
the communication. The hiding was an extra level of pain, completely understandable, and no one wanted to make it a big deal. And part of it was I, especially in those early months, couldn't really process what was happening. So if someone told me like, we're going to eat food in the other room, I'm not sure I would have understood. Well, that's because of this and to be kind and blah, blah, blah. But similar to feeling so known when someone looked me in the eye and said, I cannot believe this is happening to you.
Right.
There is such like a withness, a kindness in being in it and acknowledging it and not leaving things unsaid it just makes you feel safe.
Well, sure. I mean, it's just, and whether it's NPO and food eating or just like your life has changed and you lost somebody you love and people don't know how to invite you back into the world.
Right.
I think you're always going to be better if you err on, hey, we'd love for you to come to this thing, even though we know maybe it's not the best fit. Why don't you let us know what would be, what would make this work for you? So you've lost a lot, but at the very least, you want to maintain the fact that you can say yes or no to an invitation.
Right.
And you kind of should be the one to get to make that.
But if the invitation isn't there, then you're not having the option to engage in that. That's good. This is kind of along those same lines of community and support. Where did you guys find the people who supported your entire family and have become family? So like just those people that you can always count on, especially in those early days, the people who really held your family up. Where'd you guys find them?
I think our family, literal family, was able to really jump in the middle of our pain in a lot of ways. And then our community, our church community mostly was, again, that almost like as deep as family friendships that showed up. That was a unique kind of circumstance. And I don't want to pretend like that's available to every person.
Right.
Because, most of our friends didn't have kids and it was a different kind of moment of life. But I think, to be known in any community is hugely, hugely hard, but key to life and to resilience. And so like whether it's you're in a huge city and, you've made that city smaller by finding this great network, of 3 people, who are like-minded or who know you and get you and would literally show up and be that phone call. Or like you're in, a small town where everybody knows each other and you've moved back home and you're just already interconnected into this web. I think we all have to just have that as a high priority on how we structure our life, because it does matter when the bottom falls out, and it matters when everything's relatively going well too, to have people who, you can lean into, and who the visual of like getting under the weight of the world with you, it always comes to mind, because I think that's what we're doing. The world is heavy and life is hard. And so we carry it on our individual shoulders so often. But what if we just like got under the weight of the world for each other, and then it's just lighter. The load is lighter together. But again, that's hard to find. I don't know. It's interesting, even thinking with the next generation,
right?
Just what does community look like when the nexus of most community is disembodied? In other words, our biggest connection is often digital. And so that's really hard to translate that to somebody showing up at your hospital room. In general, the best way to connect healing and purpose and then connection to bigger community is to go back to the source of your pain and to be a part of the healing of somebody else experiencing something similar. And so again, there's a lot of internal obstacles against that, because we don't want to revisit some of that. And I think I use our story as an example. It became clear over years it was not apparent, and it was not what we wanted at first to jump into the disability community, because it was not, if we did that meant this was real, that this was our story. And it was so different than what we had expected for our lives that it was just really hard to finally get to acceptance. But once we went back to quite literally the communities of hospitals and brain rehabs and folks struggling in the story of disability, that community became everything. Right. And it still is. It has our hearts and it has our purpose. It has created for us this network of people who, maybe also haven't had their people. So the idea of like the people who don't have people, make those your people. I mean, there's so many, there's just like this huge epidemic of us all alone and isolated. How do we just find each other?
Right.
So that's the work. It's not easy, but so often that in this very upside down kingdom way, like that place that hurt you can be the place that not only helps heal you, but helps heal other people.
Yeah.
And that's profound. And that's the kind of community you want around you, is that wounded healer kind of community. It's deep.
Yeah. That was my first experience at Hope Heals Camp. So last year was my first year at camp. I honestly didn't know much about it going in. And I just assumed all these people who showed up early were personal friends of Jay and Catherine Wolf, because why would they come a day early to camp to unload trucks in 100 degrees? So I introduced myself to this woman and I said, "Oh, are you friends of Jay and Catherine?" She's like, "Oh, no. I heard Catherine speak somewhere. So what brought you to camp?" She said, "I lost my only child in a car accident and I needed a way to continue living and process pain with people who understood what it's like to lose so much." And I thought that is so profound, because she didn't come to Hope Heals Camp because of a disability connect. She didn't come to camp because, she has a child with disability. She came to camp because she felt pain and wanted to be able to be in community with people who could embrace that and live that out. And I think that's exactly what you're saying, that we have to kind of lean in and realize, like, I cannot do this alone. I can't just shove this down. I have to actually process my pain and live it out with people who understand what that's like. And that was like the perfect picture of, wow, this is exactly why this place exists, because people need to do life together like that.
Totally. We see that a lot. People who come serve at camp are needing a type of healing that is only available, I would argue, through just a deep, different kind of entering into suffering.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it's Adam Young who talked, maybe even on the GoodHard Story podcast, about trauma has the opportunity to open you up to a different capacity to hold other people's stories. And that is just so incredibly beautiful and biblical. Like you can bear more when you are in there. You've been through stuff yourself, or or not. You just are bearing witness to the deep suffering of others, and it so moves you that you're addicted. You want more and more.
Right. And I mean, family is in the kingdom of God is expansive, and that's so hopeful because, you know, our family of origin, we believe we're all in that family unit for a reason and on purpose and all those things, but it's complicated.
Right.
And there's baggage and there's hurts and there's histories and patterns and all those things. And so what a beautiful opportunity to honor that family of origin by also expanding the definition of family into a bigger community. And oftentimes it's, you know, the folks who have connected with you on this really deep heart level of understanding the same pain. And that's what we found. But again, you have to kind of push through that natural tendency to be like, but my heart's already been broken, or it's like, that's risky to put myself back in those environments or out there. But you're right. Your broken heart can be sort of made bigger on the other side of your suffering and can hold more room for other people's stuff too.
Yeah.
So
that's good.
Huge.
Okay. This could be a fun one to answer. What are the biggest challenges and the biggest gifts in your marriage that have resulted from disability?
Challenges and gifts.
Challenges. So it's been the hard and the good.
Well, you touched on it, one of them a minute earlier, that instead of saying we are codependent, we choose to believe and really think we are interdependent. And that's a gift. Jay is my permanent Uber driver. And I'm grateful. And what's another good example of, I mean,
challenges or gifts?
No, gifts. Pretty much.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, most of it is a gift.
There's no challenges, right?
Well, no, I think it's funny that it teed up that way. Like the line between codependency and interdependency is sometimes a very thin line.
Right.
So I think that also embodies kind of the struggle and the opportunity. Like there's this beautiful gift as a human to feel like you're connected, like you're needed, and that you have needs that are met by somebody. Like that interdependence is like part of what is this beautiful opportunity that disability can tee up.
Right.
On the other hand, it can sort of be a slippery slope down into codependency, or just kind of where you're not communicating well, and there's expectations here that are unmet, and that can create patterns of, I think, codependency and frustration. So anyway, we're hopefully going up the hill towards interdependency rather than sliding back.
Specifically, though, we need to share some specific challenges. I think my hearing is a big one. I'm fully deaf in one ear, and so if I'm turned the wrong way, I cannot hear you say things.
Right. Yeah, that's quite specific and true. I mean, I think we're already like in the 80-year-old couple trope of like yelling what from the other room.
Although it's amazing because I just turned over on my hearing ear and put it to the pillow and can't hear a thing.
You should do that more often.
If you're snoring.
There you go. I think, I mean, there's the challenges too of just like, expectation is just like, it's always going to be where there's tension in relationships, and lack of communicating those. So I think, if you really want to help, and I'm like, you just chill. I'm good. I got this, and even like you're having kind of a conflict over trying to be helpful because you expect yourself that you should, or you expect that in the role or the family. And I don't know, we're still working through all that. Different seasons of life change who you are and change your expectations. We're about to enter into, launching our first kid into the college world. So that's going to be a different dynamic in family and different challenges. Obviously health is always a moving target. And I mean, frankly, the reality as a caregiver, like I don't get a pass from health or accidents or a different story myself. So you kind of, those are all weighty things to deal with. And I think to process those well, in the context of our family is so important. And often when we don't, that's when those challenges come up, because there are just this inherent, way of seeing things differently But when we can be interdependent on each other, that's some of the biggest beauty and gifts. And I think to give that to our kids too, to be like, the world's not all about you.
Right.
You get to give yourself to people and also receive from people. Like, what a gift to be cared for and to care. So telling ourselves that story all the time and telling it to our kids has been the biggest gift for sure.
And again, like parenting, not projecting like, oh, I feel so guilty that I have to ask for help with this, when really it's not being received on the other end as having any sense of annoyance with having to help. So I experienced that in my own marriage. If I'm like, I need your help with this, I'm so sorry, I just can't do it. And Chris is always like, what? Why are you apologizing?
Yeah.
Like, it's okay to need help. And that's like why the Lord brings us together, because we need each other.
So true. But I mean, shout out to Chris Case, because he is an exceptional human being.
He is. He really is. Okay. How did you guys decide to try for another baby after your stroke? I would assume that wasn't like your doctors were like, yes, having a baby is the healthiest choice you could make for your body. So how did y'all process through that?
Totally. Well,
Great question.
I mean, years and years. Obviously, they're almost 8 years apart. So it wasn't like right away we're like, oh, great. But, what's interesting actually is right after the stroke, when I was moved to the brain rehab Costa Colina, I would obsessively daydream about having 6 kids. I don't really know why. I think near death, maybe there was a deep desire to create a lot of new life. And I guess I just didn't want to feel like this didn't mean I wasn't going to be a mother of more children, which that dream has sadly had to be let go of. And that being a mother of 6 was not what was in the cards for me, but there was that deep desire.
Same.
Same for 99% of people. Yeah, but my mother-in-law is one of 6, and my grandmother's one of 6, and I'm from the deep south, and I just thought big family is what I really wanted. But anyway, once I kind of finally gave up to not having 6, I didn't know if I'd ever have one again, because the doctors weren't exactly gung-ho about more children from mothering in a wheelchair. And we didn't even know if I could have another child biologically. And kind of a crazy series of events of a friend from the brain rehab who had become a quadriplegic had a baby in 2013, I think.
And her name was Lisa, and Eric, her husband. They were like the only other young couple at the brain rehab at the same time as us. And so we connected deeply, but they were characters. He was from Augusta. She was from New York. They were just this really fun and spunky, and she had just like this deep New Yorker, almost grit and determination. Like, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
And she kind of rubbed off on us.
Well, I remember one night when we went out to dinner.
Years later,
they brought their new little baby girl.
Aww.
And I think we somehow ended up just asking them, how did y'all decide it was time to jump in to having a baby? And later in the conversation, she just said, "Cat, what are you waiting for?" Yeah. And I'm like, well, I guess I'm a quadriplegic.
Yeah. Well,
can
she
jump
can do
in.
it. I think.
I guess I can too.
Yeah.
So
I think you lean into the dreams that you have. If that's still a dream, why? Investigating that. And then kind of holding that up to the light of reality and kind of doing some discernment, due diligence. You know, I mean, hey, that's a good dream, but that probably really doesn't work anymore with our life, just realistically. And that's going to maybe really turn bad. I mean, we had to really think of it from all angles, get a lot of feedback, of course, from your doctors. And then literally Catherine had a surgery pretty much to pave the way for her to possibly get pregnant. There was a totally separate aneurysm in her brain, separate from her stroke, that was just kind of there. And it was basically well, if you get pregnant, this could be an issue because fluid in your body increases, the volume of it increases so much that could create a rupture of an aneurysm, which would be bad.
That would be bad. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were, kind of went all eyes in, and yet it was still enough of a dream to say, hey, you should have the aneurysm coiled, which was done by the same doctor, Dr. Gonzalez, who saved her life with the initial brain surgery. And that was his specialty as well. So there were just all these signs like, okay, all right, next right step. It was not made kind of haphazardly. It was over years. And then finally, once the aneurysm was coiled, you were kind of like given the thumbs up and got pregnant like the next month, which was, as we say, the first medical shortcut we ever had.
Don't be too jealous.
Yeah, it was kind of a fluke, but we were grateful. And then,
one medical pass I've ever gotten.
Yeah, and John came, and it was a relatively uneventful pregnancy, and he's made it a very eventful life.
Right. He made up for it.
Not boring.
True. And then it got hard.
That's right.
When it was more.
Totally worth it. Totally worth it.
Oh, for
Amazing.
sure.
All right, this is our last question.
Yeah.
This isn't one that you guys can relate to, but maybe you could put yourselves in this position.
Okay.
How would you deal with family members who treat our child with disabilities differently than our typical children? They treat our child with disabilities with pity and tend to favor our typical children.
In our camp community, we find this a lot. We see many parents who are nearly heartbroken that their children are treated differently by their families of origin, or how loved ones in their lives very much like almost pity one child and are show favor to the other, or infantilize them. Yeah, a lot of things. And again, I think so much has to do with our narration, and that's my personality for sure. But I want to get in there and look in the eye of the grandmother and talk it out and say, I just want to be sure you recognize what you are doing to both children by doing this, and really talk about it.
Yeah.
Grab the face and do that.
Yeah, like just wake up, lady.
No, but I think also like understanding they're probably grieving in their own way,
right?
And feel uncomfortable. I mean, even the conversation around disability is not that old. I mean, 50 years ago, people were going, sent away with significant enough disabilities.
Even our childhood, like in the 80s and 90s, it wasn't the same conversation, and we're entrenched in it. This is our life. So it's very normal to us, but remembering that a lot of people don't have this experience and exposure to disability. That doesn't excuse.
Yeah.
Right. And I think to that end, to say like proximity is always gonna be the antidote to pity and to prejudice.
Yeah.
And, maybe if this is their first experience with having, up close and personal engagement with the story of disability, of course it's going to take a minute. Of course it's going to be kind of fumble their way through. So I think there's grace to realize that they get to sort of grieve, but also they get to sort of follow your lead to say, hey, like we want our kids to all be included, all be treated the same. Like it's really important to us in our family story to not have pity, but have sort of this opportunity to have everybody at the same table, to feel dignity, to feel love, to feel like there's gifts that are unique for our child disabilities that they need to offer the world and they need to offer their family. And so I think, it just takes time to tell that story to folks who maybe don't.
But a family member close to us looked at Jay shortly after my stroke and asked a question of how I felt about something. And I can remember you saying, why don't you ask her? And I answered, and she said, what'd she say? And you kind of said it very clearly what I had said, because my voice was definitely messed up. And I remember feeling so safe that, like, just ask her. She's there. Get curious. Get in there. And probably so much of being able to invite family members and friends into the story is to encourage them to be curious. Like, no, you ask her. Get in there and implore tremendous curiosity.
That's right.
Yeah, that's good. Well, this was fun. These were great questions.
These were
And thank
really
you guys
good.
for taking the time to answer them. Thank you to our community for submitting these questions and giving us the chance to talk through them and bring them to the table.
Mm-hmm. More to come, I hope. Yeah, these are challenging us to put words around some of the things that we've been learning. And it's just, these are deep waters that we're getting to go through together. So what a privilege to get to think about how to live well and live into the GoodHard story even better.
Absolutely. And how to live, this just complex story together. And it is together. We are with each other. And to that end, we close every episode by asking what's good in your story, what's hard in your story, and how do you live in the tension in both in your GoodHard story.
I would say what's hard in our story, I think, is, like we mentioned, like our oldest kid kind of teeing up on that trajectory to shift into college in the next, year and a half. I think that there's sort of this, I don't know, there's this a little bit discoloration of like, wow, this isn't going to be like this forever. And there's a tenderness to it and kind of a hard reality to it. The flip side, it's really good because it's helping us kind of be intentional and focus on how we launch him well into the world, and also make use of all the time that, we have as in this current version of our family. So I don't know, that seems kind of like cliche, but it really is like, there's a lot of deep, conversations we're having around just what's next for him. And we're really proud of him and grateful he's on a good track, but it is going to be different for us soon. So that's hard.
Yeah.
But
I'm not copying you, but mine does have similar tones to it. So I was going to say, we're in such a good season with our kids. They're a little bit older. Wait, how old are they? 13, 11, and almost 9. And so it's really sweet to see them becoming who they are as people, and seeing them engage with the world and life. And also I have these moments of, I'm not a sentimental person. If you know me, truly, I threw away my high school yearbooks.
Ouch.
When my daughter just turned 13, I'm like, you're going to be driving in 3 years, and then you're not going to be in the car with me. And the only time you tell me anything is when we're in the car, and realizing how fast this season goes, and recognizing that they're still good and we are still have time with our kids. But that season of like, wow, it feels so hard when they're little and you're in it. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is never going to end. And now it's like, wait, we're getting close to the end. And that's sad and exciting. So,
Yeah.
It's both, for sure.
And to start to see who your kids are becoming, and like,
yes,
hey, maybe we'll be friends.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe when you stop rolling your eyes at me, we'll be friends.
Exactly. That's so good.
So good. Well, thanks, guys. This was great.
Thank you.
Oh, thank y'all. This was a really great conversation. Thank you to all of the amazing listeners and friends who wrote in and shared just thoughts and questions. You've given us a lot to continue to think about and marinate on as we live out this GoodHard story together. Friend, you are not alone. We are all, as you heard through these questions, wrestling through just these deep longings and questions that we want the answers to, and we're with you. We don't have all the answers and don't pretend to, but we are always looking with you, and feel known in that. We're looking together. Ultimately, we're looking to Jesus to answer our deepest questions. So thank you for being with us.
See you soon.